How did you know there was an intruder in the house?
The same reason I shot the gun. Obviously, I didn't hear me. I didn't kill my husband. So obviously somebody else was in the house. I think I rolled Jeremy over. I noticed there was a lot of I think I put a towel like on his head where it was bleeding.
Okay.
I looked for a phone to call.
That was Jolene Simcoe during a police interrogation after they accused her of sedating and brutally executing her husband in bed for his horrific abuse. But the problem was that the crime scene looked exactly like an intruder had broken into the home and committed the murder, and investigators didn't have any solid evidence tying Jolene directly to the crime. So for nearly 4 years, they chased every lead they could find. But one by one, all of them led to dead ends.
Because there were a number of things with footprints and stuff that were never resolved. And a fingerprint that I remember hearing the detective talk about, whatever became of that.
Jolene, everything was looked at. Everything.
And you came up with nothing.
That was until they stumbled on a disturbing document they never knew existed. That was when everything began to make sense.
So we have a couple, both of them went to bed, okay? There's no forced entry into the home. No alarms went off. No driveway alarm. All the neighbors were canvassed. Nobody heard any barking dogs. And we're left with 2 people in the house. One is dead, one is not. Typically, that lends itself to making you the prime suspect.
So now the question is, would all the evidence they have be enough to challenge Jolene's intruder story? Or will her own version of events prevail?
Jolene, do you recall when you were in the emergency room at Community Hospital, when the emergency room asked you what happened, you saying, I shot my husband?
No, I didn't say that because I didn't shoot my husband.
Danita, it has been just over 7 months since the 36-year-old Simcoe was found dead in his Vermilion home, killed by a single gunshot wound to the head.
It was just after 6 in the morning on November 18th, 2009, when Jolene Simcoe made the frantic 911 call.
911, do you need police, fire, ambulance?
Yes, I need help.
What's going on? Listen to me. What is going on? What do you need, police?
According to her, she'd woken up to the sound of a loud bang she believed was a gunshot, and by the time she rushed to the room where her husband had been sleeping, she found him bleeding from a gun wound. So her story was that an intruder broke into the home and her husband in his sleep. However, when police and paramedics rushed to the house, the scene they walked into immediately raised plenty of questions. Jeremy Simcoe was lying dead in his bedroom with 1 bullet wound to the back of his head at extremely close range. Now, one thing that stood out immediately was that there was no single sign of forced entry anywhere in the house. No broken doors or windows, and no obvious chaos you would expect from a violent home invasion.
So we're left with the officers get there, they check the residence. There is no forced entry into the residence. None whatsoever.
How did they get in?
The back door was open. The screen door was closed, the back door was open.
Even more strange, the functional security systems in the home were never triggered, and as investigators combed through the house, more strange details started stacking up. In the kitchen, they found a .357 Magnum lying on the floor with 1 spent round and 5 live rounds still inside. Nearby, a chair had been knocked over, and Jolene's purse was sitting right there, still full of cash. Nothing appeared to be stolen, which immediately raised doubts about the idea of a robbery gone wrong. But things got even more suspicious outside. The couple's 5 dogs were still tied up in the backyard, and yet no neighbors reported hearing them bark that night. But then investigators found something near the yard that gave them new hope: a pair of black gloves and some unidentified footprints. However, when they tested the gloves, both Jolene's and Jeremy's DNA was found on them, and nothing pointed clearly to an intruder. So, investigators were now left trying to figure out how someone could break in, move through the house, commit a murder, and leave without setting anything off. Meanwhile, Jolene was questioned multiple times that same day. She spoke with officers at the scene, again at the hospital, and twice more later at her mother's house. Each time, her story stayed consistent with everything she told the 911 operator during the call. At that point, investigators still treated her as a grieving wife and not a suspect. They chased every lead they could find, including a tip from a woman claiming that the Simcoe's neighbor, JB, had previously pointed a gun at her friend, a contractor who had threatened Jeremy after an argument. Even a tip that the murder was part of a drug deal gone bad. But one by one, every lead led to a dead end. All alibis checked out, timelines didn't, and no evidence tied any outsider to the scene. As weeks turned into months and months into years, the case slowly went cold. Still, something about that morning never fully made sense to investigators. So, even though Jolene believed the nightmare was behind her, police were quietly doing the opposite. And in November of 2013, they found something that blew this case wide open. Then out of nowhere, investigators reached back out to Jolene and asked her to come in for another interview. By this point, Jeremy had been dead for over 4 years, which immediately raised a question. Why now? And more importantly, what had they found that made them want to hear her story again? Anyway, Jolene agreed to come in, but this time, she didn't come alone. She showed up with an attorney, confident, guarded, and clearly prepared. Her lawyer even brought up a newspaper article from the year before, which claimed that police believed they had already identified the murderer of Jeremy Simcoe. So if they already knew who did it, why were they talking to her? Anyway, investigators made it very clear that Jolene was not under arrest. At least not yet, and they started questioning her, starting from the events of the first 24 hours leading up to the murder.
During the day, we worked on the property behind us, worked in the yard, raking leaves, etc. Yard work in general.
Then later that evening, she said they canned pumpkins, watched television, and talked about their future plans. Nothing out of the ordinary. Eventually, she said they went to bed together sometime around midnight or so. She wasn't sure exactly when, but at some point during the night, she claimed Jeremy took the dogs outside and hooked them up on their chains, something they routinely did, and after that, they both went back to sleep. Later on, she said the dogs began to bark again.
The dogs were barking outside, and he had woke up and, yelled out the window at the dogs. And then both went back to sleep.
That was after she said they'd both taken sleeping pills, which explains the Benadryl investigators found in Jeremy's system during autopsy. The problem was investigators didn't believe Jeremy had taken anything willingly. In a previous interview, Jolene herself had admitted that Jeremy stopped using sleeping pills long before his death because he felt he was becoming addicted.
You had indicated in a previous statement that he had taken sleeping pills for a long period of time and almost got basically addicted to it. And then he laid off of it because he was addicted to it. On this particular night, it just seemed to be coincidental that on the night he got killed, he happened to start taking sleeping pills at that time.
So now the question is, who would want to sedate him?
If he hadn't taken the sleeping pills, and he would have woke up when someone was entering the room, and he would have reached for the automatic weapon.
And he would have defended himself. Anyway, Jolene told investigators that shortly after they took the pills, she went upstairs to the 3rd floor to sleep because Jeremy's snoring wouldn't let her sleep. But a short while into her sleep, that was when she said she heard the loud bang that startled her awake.
I woke up to whatever sound that I heard. Obviously was a gunshot. I went back down to the 2nd floor.
She assumed Jeremy was shooting out the window at wildlife, something she said they did very often, so she went downstairs to the 2nd floor.
And I went to the bedroom and I found him in the bed. And I thought I heard some noises out in the hallway.
The strange noise, she said, made her grab one of Jeremy's guns from the drawer and fire 2 shots towards the hallway because she believed an intruder had broken into the house. It was only after that she said she went over to help Jeremy.
And then I think I went over and closed at some point. I don't know if it was right after that I went and shut and locked the door to the bedroom. And then I went in the bed to help Jeremy, and I called 911. He wasn't responding to me.
Okay.
And then I felt something wet, and then almost immediately heard noise.
Okay.
I think I rolled Jeremy over. I noticed there was a lot of I think I put a towel on his head where it was bleeding.
Okay.
I looked for a phone to call.
Now, one important detail we have to point out here is that Jolene had mentioned that she'd locked the door behind her before trying to help Jeremy. And the question is, if she saw her husband was in immediate danger, why would she waste that much time trying to lock the door? Or was that her trying to build up her intruder story? Sounds suspicious, right? But the investigators confronted her with something even more damning.
There was no fingerprints of Jeremy found on the door to the kitchen, and no DNA. that would have indicated that he would have touched that door.
Well, he would have touched the door. That was the only door we used in the house.
Jolene had told investigators that Jeremy was the one who locked the door on the night of the incidents, but it turned out his DNA was never found on the door. And not just that, 9mm Jolene had fired in the hallway, which she admitted she was still holding when she touched Jeremy's blood while helping on the bed, had no traces of blood or fingerprints on it. The gun was wiped clean.
Did you wipe that gun off in any way? And the reason I ask you that is because there wasn't any blood on that weapon that you fired. I'm assuming that had you had it on your hands or in the bed, there would have been some blood on there. And I didn't know if you had wiped the gun off in any way.
I don't remember wiping it.
Even the .357 Magnum murder weapon, one of Jeremy's own guns, which was found on the kitchen floor, also had no traces of any DNA or blowback from the injury since she was shot at a point-blank range.
If we assume your theory that there is an intruder in the home, don't you think the intruder would be in a hurry to leave if he heard the shots that you fired?
I would say, yeah.
Okay.
Again, she had no explanation for that, and she also couldn't explain why only her DNA was found on the cabinet where the gun had been stored before the murder.
Is there any reason that you can think of that a DNA swab of the curio cabinet would only have your DNA on it?
Absolutely not.
So now we have an intruder who miraculously entered this home without forcing their way in, without setting off any alarms, without being caught on camera or alerting the dogs. But somehow this intruder made their way through the darkened home, retrieved a gun from a cabinet that had only Jolene's DNA, and even after committing the murder, they still had the time to wipe the weapon clean of any DNA or blowback from the injury. None of that made any sense, and at this point, investigators knew they were missing something. So they had to take a step backwards to look into Jeremy and Jolene's relationship. And almost immediately, a disturbing picture began to form.
And I understand that there's trauma involved here, that it's a difficult time, but we're left with a feeling that we don't have the complete story.
Jolene and Jeremy met years earlier when Jolene was still very young. According to people who knew them back then, the relationship started with trouble. She was dating someone else at the time, and when that boyfriend found out about Jeremy, things turned physical. One former friend later said Jolene seemed to encourage the confrontation, almost setting it up so Jeremy would fight him.
You know, I felt like she orchestrated him to get beat up by Jeremy, and then after that, she started dating Jeremy.
They eventually got married, built a life together, and even ran a tree service business together. From the outside, their life looked picture perfect, but those who spent time around them told a different story. Multiple witnesses described Jeremy as volatile. He had a temper, cursed at workers, argued with neighbors, and wasn't shy about confrontation. Family members and former partners described him as aggressive and intimidating. One of his cousins recalled Jeremy admitting to choking Jolene during an argument, pinning her against a wall by her throat. Even Jolene herself admitted to the police that Jeremy had hit her once early in their marriage, though she downplayed the seriousness and said it never happened again.
When you did argue, did it ever become violent?
I did tell the detective that he did hit me one time.
How long
It was
ago
the
was
only
that?
time, probably when I first got married.
However, people close to them weren't so sure it stopped there. In fact, they said both partners were violent toward each other. Jolene, on the other hand, told investigators that they had a perfect relationship.
How would you describe your relationship with Jeremy?
It was a good relationship. He was the love of my life.
Okay.
But nobody in their lives has anything good to say about them. Jeremy's cousin told investigators about an incident of animal cruelty during his early teens when he shot a farmer's dog while camping. Jeremy's ex-girlfriend also reported another incident in which Jeremy stalked his ex and her new partner and even cut his dog's throat. This guy was obviously a psychopath and should have never been allowed to own another dog, but he was not the only crazy one in the relationship. The man Jolene dated shortly after Jeremy's death told investigators about a disturbing comment she made after he hit her one time.
When I was apologizing to her about slapping her, this kind of scared me. She said, "Oh, I've been hit harder than that. I'm not worried about that." I kind of felt like a piece of crap.
Former clients who worked closely with the couple described another disturbing pattern. Jeremy never let Jolene out of his sight. He constantly watched her, yelled at her in public, and berated her while she worked high up in trees. According to one client, the control felt very intentional and strange. He suspected there was something more to it, and he was right, because while investigators were going through the couple's files and personal belongings, they found something that blew this case wide open. They discovered numerous graphic pictures and videos involving Jolene, but even more disturbing than that was a 14-page page-long handwritten master-slave father-daughter agreement.
And this has been referred to by investigators as pertaining to the document agreement and or a father-daughter agreement.
So apparently, Jolene and Jeremy had a master-slave or father-daughter role-play relationship.
Would you agree that this paints a pretty domineering picture of your husband?
He was a dominant guy.
Okay. And you were comfortable in that relationship?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You didn't mind being subservient to him
This
to
was
the
only,
point of degradation.
This was only role playing
His only role
for your information. Just so you know, it wasn't like in a daily relationship. It was like this.
Now, while that might not seem like a big deal to some people, but that's until you look at Jolene's past sexual abuse history with her own father.
And I'm very sorry to bring it up, but I think it bears mentioning here. A very traumatic event happened to you when you were a child. You were sexually abused by your father, correct?
Jolene claimed that whatever happened between her and Jeremy in the bedroom was consensual, but when investigators pressed her for details, she refused to say whose idea it was or how the master-slave relationship started. That left investigators weighing two very different possibilities. Either Jolene was repeating patterns from her past, or Jeremy had been the one who forced it on her, trapping her in the traumatic cycle of abuse from her father. And that might explain the clearest motive why she may have wanted him dead. Even more strangely, 11 hours before Jeremy was killed, someone using their home computer searched for Jolene's father's obituary.
11 hours before your husband is found dead, someone is on the computer in your house pulling up your father's obituary. Now, why would that be, and who would do that?
First of all, I would like to see that, proof of that, because I don't think that ever happened.
But we have that proof.
Well, I'd like to see it. I'd like to see what time it was and everything else.
Jolene denied making the search, but investigators were not convinced. It could not have been a coincidence. Just hours before her husband, with whom she had a father-daughter relationship, was shot, someone had searched for memories of her father, the very man who first introduced her to that kind of relationship. By the time investigators wrapped up that final interview, they didn't have a confession. Jolene never admitted to anything and never changed her story. But the truth is, they didn't need her to, because they already had the final piece of the puzzle, and it came from a place where Jolene least expected. So, investigators tracked down the nurse who treated Jolene in the emergency room the morning Jeremy died. And according to that nurse, during the chaos and confusion, Jolene made a chilling statement she'd never forget.
Jolene, do you recall when you were in the emergency room at Community Hospital, when the emergency room asked you what happened, you saying, "I shot my husband"?
No, I didn't say that because I didn't shoot my husband.
Jolene flatly denied it, but the thing is, she told another person something similar.
Do you recall telling an acquaintance of yours that Jeremy knows who shot him?
No.
Again, she denied it, but there's another damning evidence from the frantic 911 call she'd made after the murder. According to a professional assessment, Jolene was not performing any CPR on Jeremy during the 911 call as she'd claimed. The call analyst pointed out that the audio didn't match what someone actively doing chest compressions would sound like. In fact, they said she sounded like a guilty caller. That guilt was part of the reason investigators believe she staged another break-in at the home less than 24 hours after Jeremy's death. She claimed the intruder broke into a safe, stole $2,375 and the house surveillance system. But once again, there were no clear signs of forced entry. The contractor who had fixed the safe said the damage didn't make sense and looked staged, almost like someone wanted it to look like a break-in without actually knowing how the safe worked.
Why would you use that crowbar?
You wouldn't. That's the whole point. That's almost like a setup. Something to throw in there that, like, they tried to use that.
By December of 2014, nearly 5 years after Jeremy was killed, investigators were finally ready to make their move. Jolene Simcoe was indicted on multiple charges, including aggravated murder, felonious assault, and tampering with evidence. She was arrested and finally held accountable for the case that had haunted everyone involved for years. At trial, Jolene chose a bench trial during which multiple witnesses took the stand to testify against her. They laid out the contradictions, the clean weapons, the missing DNA, the disturbing relationship dynamics, the hospital statement, and the 911 call analysis. At the end, the court found that the evidence proved beyond a reasonable doubt that Jolene Simcoe was responsible for her husband's death for two major reasons, which included Jolene's financial greed for Jeremy's $6,000 life inside money, and secondly, Jeremy's abusive treatment, which reminded her of her abusive father. On October 20th, 2017, nearly 8 years after Jeremy was shot in his own bed, Jolene was found guilty. She was sentenced to 28 years in prison. In 2021, she appealed the conviction, but the court upheld it. At the time of making this video, Jolene remains incarcerated, and Jeremy's family is left with the weight of a loss that can never be undone.